Hello there, denizens of the warp. Void Dwarf Studios here, and we are going back into the final video for the Nighthaunt. And we will be looking at their named characters, the most prevalent ones anyway. And we're going to start off with the lower end of the spectrum, although by no means not unimportant. We're going to start off with the Mirrorghast Banshee of Shadespire, the Briar Queen, a particularly vicious and vindictive individual. The Briar Queen was a death mage back in the Age of Myth. She was in service to Nagash, and she led an army into the city of Shadespire to bring down its rulers. Her armies got so close that they threatened to tear down the walls. Following a very long and bloody campaign, she was eventually defeated, captured, and sentenced to imprisonment in the Night Vault, a prison that is part arcane science and part scientific laboratory. This is where the rulers of the city, the Cataphragnes, confined their worst criminals and conducted dark and inhumane experiments on them. She was eventually condemned to the prison of obsidian glass, a unique resource that the city was famous for creating. This substance could be used to fashion mirrors, trinkets, and artifacts that can store the soul, even after death, allowing people to live eternally, though typically trapped within an object that keeps the individual's soul alive but torments, ravages, and drastically affects their sanity. This drove the Briar Queen to misery and despair, still hating her jailers, shrieking and cursing their names within her silent prison. Leap forward thousands of years. In the Age of Sigmar, Nagash released her from her crystal tomb and shaped her broken mind into a banshee, giving her an unparalleled mastery of the necromantic arts and unleashing her upon the intruders of the mirrored city that was now under his control. He also granted her the power to enter the mortal realms with an army of claimed souls, and in an ironic twist of fate, the souls she claimed were the jailers who held her prisoner, and a couple inmates that she got to know. Although she does return to the city every now and again, seeking out her vengeance on any who still reside there. The Briar Queen is a very dangerous combatant. You have to field her with her companions, as they are part of the Warcry game, but do not think for 1 minute that she is without her merits. All banshees are dangerous creatures, and she is more dangerous than most. As this is a video about the various characters that you can field in Age of Sigmar, I won't talk much about the Thorns of the Briar Queen, her posse who come along with her, the poor chain rasps who used to be her jailers and various prison inmates. I will talk instead about the Briar Queen herself. She has a pretty decent stat line, especially as she's a relatively cheap hero. She is Bravery 10, 5 wounds, 6 move, and 4+ save. Not half bad, not bad at all. She can fly, and of course she has the ethereal rule, meaning that no rend affects her. One of the most irritating aspects of the Nighthaunt from personal experience. She has 2 weapons, her Briar Whip, which is that beautiful thorny rosy whip that she has, which is her melee attack. It's just 1 attack, but you know, it's okay. 3-inch range, it's hits on 3s and wounds on 3s, -2 rend and d3 damage. And her missile attack, which is her Banshee Scream, or in this case called the Rending Scream, 10 inches, 3 attacks, hitting on 3s, wounding on 3s, -3 rend and 1 damage. That's, again, not half bad. That will definitely knock off a couple models. However, the reason you take the Briar Queen isn't just because she can scream really well, and it's certainly not for the whip. It is because she is a wizard. She can cast 1 spell a turn, all the basic ones like Arcane Bolt and Mystic Shield, but she also knows a unique one called the Howling Vortex, described as being a pitch black void of shrieking winds that grabs enemies and drags them towards it. A casting value of 7, and if successful, you pick a point on the battlefield within 18 inches of the caster. You roll 2d6 for each enemy unit within 6 inches of the point you've picked. If the roll is greater than the value of the unit's move characteristics, or that roll is a double, the unit suffers a mortal wound, and its move characteristic is halved until the next hero phase. So essentially this spell is great for slowing down enemies, and on top of that, you've got a fairly good chance of causing a mortal wound. Especially as, on average, a unit's movement is a 6, 5 to a 6, you're going to be able to kill at least a couple models with that, particularly slower enemies like, say, giants or trolls or anything big and lumbering. Dwarves would really suck against this, but in addition, it's not so much the mortal wound that does the real headache for you, it's the fact that your move just got halved. So if you're a poor stumpy dwarf who tends to only have a movement of 4 at the best, you're now only moving 2 inches. And that's frustrating. It means she can back out of range, keep screaming at you, and hit you again with this spell. Whilst not a general, at least not in your main Nighthaunt army book, you can still take her as an additional attachment. And like I said before, she is not to be underestimated. That Howling Vortex could be very useful in the right circumstances, and her posse aren't that bad either. We now come to a truly terrifying character, and one who is considered one of Nagash's most favoured lieutenants, Reichnor, the Grim Hailer. Mounted on his winged nightmare known as Kyleron, this apparition of death is a very, very, very unfortunate sight if you happen to be fighting against the Nighthaunt. Reichnor has been around for a very long time and has had many names: the Grim Hailer, the Storm Rider, the Grim Reaper, and he is all these things, a master sorcerer. As much as we can glean from the Nighthaunt army book, Reichnor's past is a bit of a mystery. We don't really know much about him except that he was once a sorcerer king who had designs to overcome death. His quest for knowledge on how to achieve this was all-consuming. A bit like the Mormon banshees who attempted to avoid death, Reichnor's attempts to unbind his soul from the mortal coils attracted the attention of Nagash, and not the kind of attention you ever want on your person at all. It is said that Reichnor used the magic of Hayesh, the light magic, also known as the light of reason, in order to try and undo death. But he was unsuccessful, and when he eventually died, the Grim Hailer rose from death, able to keep a hold of his spirit, but not much more than that. Prior to the necroquake that rose the Nighthaunt from their graves, he often haunted the mortal realms by himself, going from place to place, from battle to battle, harvesting the souls of the living in order to keep his own sanity in one piece, although, to be fair, there was not a whole lot of that left. The very fact that he had become a wraith was already eating at his soul and sanity, and any noble intention he may have once harboured to escape death was long gone, as was his ability to channel the magic of light. He was now firmly a necromancer. Nagash claimed his soul. Now his quarry is no longer eldritch spells or secrets to reverse death. Instead, he is now Nagash's personal assassin. Using his arcane powers, he can sense the souls that belong to Nagash, and he can sense it when people tamper with necromantic magic, or try to revive lost loves, or desecrate monuments sacred to Nagash. Those who do this and are not in Nagash's service will be the target of Reichnor. Upon detecting these blasphemies, he will swoop down on his winged nightmare, a gift from his new master. With his powerful scythe in hand, the Fell Reaper, he will shriek hexes and curses of a magical nature upon you as he decapitates or carves you in half with his scythe. Through one of his incantations, Reichnor can summon a wraith storm, a cyclone of amethyst dark magic that stirs the souls recently separated from their bodies, and they lash out at the living. A spectral hurricane in which these wraith-like figures pull down and drag down those who are alive. Whether they were once friends or not, it no longer mattered. They were under the control of Reichnor. On his winged steed, there are several candles, known as corpse candles. They are a unique mix of tallow and, well, the former apprentices of Reichnor, as they were his first targets when he managed to escape the clutches of death and came back as a wraith, along with a nice dash of grave sand. Whenever he snuffs out one of these candles, Reichnor can end the life of anyone within close proximity of him that he desires, siphoning a portion of their essence into himself, tearing a piece of their soul away from them. The Grim Hailer is now condemned to kill forever for his master, the god of undeath. A man once obsessed with bringing light into the darkness by cheating death, he is now an agent of darkness, snuffing out the light, in a beautiful irony of Nagash's making. Reichnor the Grim Hailer is a very, very dangerous character to fight, and his stat line reflects this quite nicely. Bravery 10, 7 wounds, 14-inch movement thanks to his wonderful, wonderful steed, and a 4+ save. Of course, he has the typical ethereal rule as well as being able to fly, but it is his extra touches that make him just that more terrifying. His scythe Fell Reaper has 4 attacks, hitting on 4s, wounding on 3s, -1 rend and 2 damage, and his lovely little flying horse can do 3 attacks, hitting on 4s and wounding on 4s with 1 damage. Whilst that is a very respectable attack profile, this is not what Reikenor is for. It's his abilities and magic that make him truly scary as a sorcerer king. Starting off with Frightful Touch. This is an effect that Fell Reaper, his 2-handed scythe, has on those around him. If you hit an enemy with your scythe and that hit is a 6, it inflicts 2 mortal wounds. So yeah, that's already pretty scary. And his extra ability, Reaped Like Corn, means he gets to re-roll failed hit rolls for Fell Reaper if the target unit has 5 or more models. So in fact, Reikenor is very comfortable in the middle of fighting a horde. It just gives him those rerolls and just means he kills things far more effectively. And then there's the magic. He can only cast 1 spell a turn. He knows the Arcane Bolt Mystic Shield spell, but it's his special one, the Wraith Storm. This is of particular note. Wraith Storm is cast on 7, and if successful you pick an enemy unit within 12 inches. This has to be visible to the caster. That unit suffers D3 mortal wounds, and if any model is slain as a result of the spell, an additional D3 mortal wounds is achieved. That's a bit ouch. That is very much an ouch type spell. It's just a direct damage spell with the potential to do even more, so you better have some way to protect yourself from mortal wounds, otherwise you have no defense. And then we come to those eerie candles. Corpse Candles. In your hero phase, before this model attempts to cast a spell, you can say to your opponent that you will snuff out a corpse candle. If you do so, either pick Reikenor or an enemy model within 12 inches. If a mortal wound was suffered by an enemy model, you add 1 to casting rolls. If the mortal wound was suffered by Reikenor, you add 3 to the casting roll. So, if you wound yourself, you get a better casting roll. If you wound others, you get +1. So, I would say this is a very situational ability, but it certainly means that even a basic spell like an Arcane Bolt cast on a 5 is going to go off very, very easily. I mean, you need a 2 to get it off. That's very handy. Reikenor is very comfortable fighting against hordes, and the fact is, that ability to do extra mortal wounds with his scythe and Wraith Storm and Corpse Candle, that potentially, if everything goes off successfully, Reikenor can cause 17 mortal wounds by my count. That's horrifying. I mean, obviously everything has to hit and you have to be successful with everything, but still, that is a frightening potential. And now another lieutenant of Negash's making, one only superseded by Lady Olinda herself, the betrothed husband to Lady Olinda, Kurdos Valentian, or who you may know more ominously as the Craven King. In life, Kurdos was a ruthless man, wicked to the core and wanting power for himself. He would not hesitate to stoop to assassination, betrayal, subterfuge, any underhanded tactic to gain power. He was known to be responsible for betraying entire armies if it meant getting his way, and responsible for murdering all of his brothers in order to succeed to the throne. This ruthless attitude gained him the attention of Negash, for whilst he existed within the realm of Shyesh, in his own little kingdom, Kurdos was unique. He was a follower of Sigmar, or at least in his own belief in the god king Sigmar, which in the realm of Shyesh was a dangerous religious mentality to have. This was enough to anger the necromancer. Upon his death, Negash took special pleasure in bringing him back as a wraith, whisking him away from the under-empire that he had created for himself, and choosing the exact moment to be when he became king. Whisking him away from this, he granted him a touch from his legendary staff of power, bestowing upon Kurdos incredible physical strength, but also a curse, because Negash is a god that loves to screw with people all the time. Negash made absolutely sure that Kurdos understood, in no uncertain terms, that he would never ever rule, and the closest he would get would be in name only. He married him to Lady Olinda to be a military advisor, for whilst Lady Olinda was now the Mortarch of Grief and an incredibly powerful sorceress, she did not have the military mind to enact grand campaigns. Kurdos, however, had plenty of experience in this theatre, but Nagash made absolutely sure that he would never, ever lead. Kurdos was at best a strongman, a bodyguard, and Nagash made sure that he would taunt him with this fact for the rest of his existence, including the throne that he once had in life, that he was allowed to sit upon, and carrying the Sepulchra scepter, a weapon that he once had as a king in life, that with his prodigious strength was powerful enough to break giant skulls asunder. The curse was that Kurdos could not utter a word any louder than a whisper. Once forceful and commanding, Kurdos Valentian could not speak any louder than this. So any of his instructions had to be passed on to Lady Olinda, and they were in a relationship that was, to call it toxic would be charitable. They hated one another, but because of the power of Nagash, there was nothing they could do. They were stuck. He was bound to his throne as it hovers above the ground, sitting in a despondent, depressed posture. However, the same could not be said for the two heralds that accompany him at all times. These are the spirits of two people who Kurdos betrayed and supplanted, and now the heralds that hover over him are fated to always serve and announce his triumphs, but with a bitter twist. They would proclaim loudly with their trumpets that Kurdos was the usurper, the false lord, the craven king, and the last one stuck, and they would interject each other with boasts and ignoble deeds that Kurdos did in life. Once a forceful and commanding presence, Kurdos Valentian's curse prevents him from ever being like this again. Beyond whispering tactical advice to Lady Olinda, he has no control over the battle. An aura of bitterness exudes from Kurdos. So powerful is this aura that it can even make commanders who see him, who are trying to rally their troops, find that their words that are meant to encourage die in their mouths, unable to issue commands, frightened beyond belief as Kurdos hovers above them and his mace comes crashing down. Kurdos Valentian is quite the bruiser. He has bravery 10, 7 wounds, a 6-inch movement on his floating throne, and a 4+ save, with all the basic trappings that Nighthaunt have. Ethereal, he flies, but he also has plenty of other abilities. But first we'll start with the weapons. The Sepulchre... Sorry, this is a tricky one. The Sepulchre... It's because of how it's spelled. Sepulchre Scepter, thank you, has 5 attacks, not bad at all. 3s to hit, 3s to wound, with a -2 rend and d3 damage. That's pretty tasty. That's very tasty. I'll have plenty of that. His heralds, unfortunate attendants that constantly give him unpleasant jeers and constantly make him feel, a bit worthless, but that's the whole point, I suppose. They have 6 attacks, hitting on 4s, wounding on 4s, and doing 1 damage, with no rend. So they're more for killing chaff that's around your Craven King, but, that's very handy. Now on to the abilities. Starting off, we have Frightful Touch. Remember this from Reikenor the Grimhailer? Well, in this case, it is the spectres around Kurdos who do this. When their spectral claws hit on a 6, they cause a mortal wound. That's potentially wonderful, because that's a couple extra mortal wounds coming your way. In addition to this, Soul Crushing Smite, the wonderful sepulchre... the mace, the scepter, every unmodified wound roll of a 6 does d6 wounds instead of d3. So yeah, that's potentially horrifying, on top of all those mortal wounds. And he has 2 further abilities that really reflect how Nagash has decided to screw with him. Suffer No Rival. He gets to re-roll hit rolls for attacks made with the mace if the target is the enemy general. This is to reflect that his bitterness and anger at never being able to rule means that he will fight more viciously against anything that looks like they have command. And the last one is, if I cannot rule, none shall. At the start of the enemy hero phase, after the opposing player receives their command points, roll a dice. On a 5+, you take one of their command points away and you receive it instead, which is really amazing. It means potentially you can deny your opponent their command points stopping them from using their command abilities, and yeah, that's potentially really frustrating. Kurdos Valentian, the Craven King, is a fantastic bodyguard for Olinda. You couldn't really ask for much better. With 5 attacks with a potential to do D6 each, that's just bonkers. And whilst he can lead armies, he is a character, so he can lead armies, he has no command ability, which is all part of the mocking that Nagash likes to do with this poor unfortunate... Well, I wouldn't say unfortunate, because he thoroughly deserves this fate. But with Nagash, you sometimes feel that even those who deserve it possibly don't deserve this much of a screwing over. But that's all up to individual taste and speculation, I suppose. And here we are now, ladies and gentlemen. The Mortarch of Grief. The leader of the Nighthaunt processions, the once Queen of Dolorum, ruler of the spiritual host, Lady Olinda, the Mortarch of Grief. I covered Olinda a bit in the history video for the Nighthaunt, but I will go over it again here, as she is a very important character for the Nighthaunt. This is their leader, chosen by Nagash out of trillions of souls because of how perfect her circumstances fit Nagash's taste for the Nighthaunt. And I'm going to read a quick extract from the Army book. She is the Mourning Bride, the unrequited Queen, the Veiled Lady, and the Mortarch of Grief. She is despair made manifest, gloom given form. She is Lady Olinda, and in her is bound all the sorrow and anguish of the mortal realms. Yup. This is what we're dealing with. Gifted a portion of Nagash's power, much like Kurdos Valentian, Lady Olinda, who pretended to be a grieving widow in life, feels all the grief of the mortal realms in death, it now becoming a new weapon that she will use against the living. Mind-crippling waves of purest desolation. Mortals in her presence are so overwhelmed by this strong will that few can remain upright. Most fall to their knees, battered by their own impending sense of hopelessness. Her power can make mothers forsake their children, warriors lay down their swords, and stop the beating heart of a living man. She hovers above the ground, attended by her bridesmaids, a pair of banshee handmaidens. One bridesmaid bears an ensorcelled gravesand hourglass, a gift from Nagash. Where she advances, grave roses sprout before her, their flowers blooming and dying within minutes, laying a path of petals that float behind her. In her hand she wields the Staff of Midnight, the lightest touch of which is enough to wither a mighty oak or kill a man outright. With her powerful incantations she can direct a despair to weigh upon her foes, slowing them like unholy lodestones. Those afflicted by this mental burden can cause even the bravest to tremble, their arms feeling like lead, their minds falling to despair. But most dangerous of all is when she looks in your direction, when she fixes her gaze on you underneath her veil. What horrors are seen there none have lived to tell. She leads the vanguard of Nagash's invasion into a new age of death and destruction. Whew. Yes, this is the Mortarch of Grief. In her past she used her power of manipulation, her feminine charms, her superior mind, her magical gifts, to supplant, betray, murder and assassinate all those up towards the ladder of ruler of Dolorum. And even when she got there, she continued to use such methods to keep people in check, using her grief as a cloak to make her appear like a more holy individual than her heart truly was. And when chaos came for her city, and when she died, Nagash took her soul and turned her fake grief into true grief, leaving her in the ruins of Dolorum for thousands of years. Only upon his resurrection and rebirth, when the Necroquake created the Nighthaunt and he needed someone to lead them, did he remember the Veiled Lady, and not only that, was impressed that she had reconquered her city and kept it for ghosts and ghoulish creatures. It was this ability for her to hold on to what little of her sanity was left that Nagash found impressive, making her into the Mortarch of Grief, empowering her with new purpose, and using her incredible new abilities to shake the realms around her. Lady Olinda is the best, and also one of the toughest. Whilst it might not seem at first, bravery 10, 7 wounds, 6-inch movement and a 4+ save, her profile disguises her deadliness. Her handmaidens have the frightful touch ability, meaning that all 6s inflict mortal wounds on their hit rolls, and her weapons don't immediately shock a mage. She has her Staff of Midnight, which is 3 attacks, hitting on 3s, wounding on 3s, -2 rend and d3 damage, fairly standard for a mage. Her Banshee handmaidens have 6 attacks that hit on 4s, wound on 4s with 1 damage, but remember, hits of 6 are mortal wounds, so that is still very decent. But it's her abilities that make them all the more fascinating. Remember that Gravesand timer, the gift from Nagash? Once per battle in your hero phase, you can choose to either inflict d6 mortal wounds on an enemy hero within 6 inches, or heal d6 wounds to yourself. That's pretty damn terrifying. That potentially means that you're killing a hero outright, you're crippling them if they're within 6 inches. That's pretty damn horrible. Her handmaidens have the Whale of Doom ability, which means that they roll 2d6 in the shooting phase. Hey, another shooting attack. You roll 2d6 for each enemy unit within 10 inches of this model, and if you roll higher than the unit's bravery, they take d3 mortal wounds. Again, things like goblins are just going to die in droves to this particular ability. And her 2 other abilities before we go on to magic and command, starting with Lifting the Veil. Those that see what lie beneath Lady Olinda's veil die with death mask of shock and horror upon their faces, their grief only serving to feed the Mortarch's insatiable desire. At the start of your hero phase, pick an enemy unit within 12 inches that is visible and roll a dice. On a 1, nothing happens. On a 2, plus, that unit suffers a number of mortal wounds equal to the roll. In addition, if an enemy unit is slain by this ability, you heal d3 wounds. So, yeah. Ow. That's another way to heal yourself. That's pretty horrible. And the last ability is Mortarch of Grief. Add 1 to the number of models that flee from enemy units that fail a battle shock test while they're within 12 inches of this model. So yeah, if you do break, your break is going to hurt that much more if Lady Olinda's within that 12 inches. That's not good for the opponent anyway. But of course, Lady Olinda is a sorceress, a very powerful one, able to cast 2 spells a turn, not half bad. Arcane Bolt and Mystic Shield, but she also has Grief Stricken. Grief Stricken has a casting value of 7, and if successful, you pick an enemy unit that is within 18 inches and visible to you. Until your next hero phase, subtract 1 from hit rolls for attacks, and add 1 to hit rolls for attacks made against that unit. So yeah, that's just made your Nighthaunt even more terrifying. Because if you target, for example, an elite unit with like a high hit ratio, you've just nullified them a bit. And if you target a unit with a low hit ratio, you've just made it virtually impossible. That's not going to be fun for anyone. But her command ability is what really makes her by far the best general for your army. No rest for the wicked. Should the spectral forms of her minions be banished or destroyed, Lady Olinda will wrench their souls back from the underworld time and again until her will is done. I think you can see where this is going. Use this command ability in your hero phase if this model is your general and is on the battlefield. If you do so, you can return 1 slain model to each friendly summonable Nighthaunt unit of a friendly model within 12 inches of Lady Olinda. Having witnessed this a number of times, and summonable Nighthaunt mean essentially your battle line units, with a few exceptions, but essentially most of your army can just be regenerated. It's 1 model, so it's not necessarily going to cause a massive problem, but it's just that little extra. And you've got so many other characters who can just resurrect more Nighthaunt that with Lady Olinda's buff on top, that just means you've got an ever regenerating army. That's pretty damn terrifying, and it's with good reason that this makes her the Mortarch of Grief. And she's more than capable of killing characters, wiping out hordes. You're going to need a dedicated unit to take down Lady Olinda. Or a spell, but it'll have to be a sufficiently powerful one. And those are the characters for the Nighthaunt. I hope you've all enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe and click that little bell icon so you always get to hear the next video that's coming out. Thank you all very much for listening. I am so grateful to my new subscribers and my new Patreon supporter. Thank you so much, Douglas Lyon. I will keep the content up. I will do my best to keep improving it, and I look forward to hearing from you all soon. Until then, Take care, everyone.